Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute just for another few people, give people time just to log in. People tend to be a little late for these virtual meetings and webinars. So we'll just give it one more minute. Just allow people join in. Thanks for your patience. Okay, we just get started there. I know the others will join in due course. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Conor Cooney. I'm the chair of IWFM Ireland region. Delighted to have you all here today. And special thanks to our guest, Mike, who was online here also. Today we're going to be talking about emerging trends and disruptive technologies in the future of FM and workplace experience. So again, this is part of our overall activities and events that IWFM Ireland has in line. We have several more activities lined up in the coming weeks. Obviously, we have this today. At the end of May, we have the FM lunch event in the Gibson Hotel. So we're selling tables quite quickly on that. That's going really well for us. We've also planned to have a site visit to the National Children's Hospital in mid-June. We're just finalising a specific date for that. And we'll also be looking to have an in-person session on contracts and troop and risk of redundancy payments and other specific areas. So that's kind of up to our summer period, at which point then we'll be taking a break until August and September. So for today's event, I just want to thank Derek O'Boyle and Barry Aston and the committee and other committee members for getting this organised here today. Very grateful to them for all the work and time that they put into this. I just want to introduce Mike. I suppose Mike is an international thought leader. He'll be exploring emerging technologies, workplace trends, and looking at disruptive impact of these technologies and the future of FM and workplace. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this, so if you could hold those questions till the end, that would be great. And just to note that we'll also be recording this session as well. So, Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you whenever you're ready.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. The last time I did a IWFM session was about 5 years ago, and the session was entitled, "Hey Dad, did you ever work at a desk?" And I was trying to be provocative at the time about the future of work being agile, and we would no longer be tied to our desk. But little did I know, 5 years on, post-pandemic, the question, "Hey Dad, did you ever work in an office?" could be something that was really worth even putting on a screen. But here we are. And the picture on the right, for those wondering, was generated by AI. So what I'm going to cover today is the kind of broad trends that we see in the world of work and workplace. And I'll narrow down and get quite focused on some thoughts around the future of technology's influence over work and ultimately into facilities management, and how we might measure the success of our efforts in the future given those changes. And those of you who've seen me speak before I've always sort of started framing that the need for us as experts in real estate is that we need to have a PhD in the world of work. And historically, for real estate professionals, they're often focused on purely the P, being experts in the physical environments, the assets, the ability to build, operate, or acquire bricks and mortar. And I think what's changed over the last decade is that the need to be true experts, you need to have a deep understanding of the human-centric needs of the user of that real asset. And increasingly, and more importantly, we need to understand how technology can enable both the asset performance and ultimately the end user experience. And I think that's going to be the key for effective real estate services, is our ability to fuse seamlessly physical, human, and digital elements to create great business and human outcomes. Now, for my day job, I spend my time, I lead tech, media, and telecom sector for CBRE here in Europe. All my clients sit in those industries, and I spend most of my time engaging with heads of properties around their priorities and strategies and pain points. And I thought it'd be useful to start as to the outcomes that are focused the minds of my clients, because ultimately the solutions need to respond to the challenges and needs if they're going to have any real impact. I've summarized as simple as I can the top 5 themes that I probably discussed the most with my clients. Despite the sort of downturn we had in the late 22 into 23 of my sector, we're starting to see growth again, hopefully not too damaged by the world around us in geopolitics in 2024, but certainly we're starting to see the importance and relevance of attracting and retaining great people is a key obligation and in fact measure of a successful real estate team, more so than ever before. I think in the past you could hide behind the fact that you run efficient and safe and clean facilities, but actually if you're not contributing to broader business objectives of attracting talent but also enabling that talent when it does come into the workplace, then you're probably missing the point. The second thing I would highlight is that we are increasingly moving towards a agile workplace strategy where space is no longer linked and owned by the individual, but is provided as a means to an end, i.e., to enable the goals and outcomes of a particular individual, whatever their task is that day, which may be sitting at a desk doing some catching up of email, but it often and increasingly will be around collaborating with their team, connecting and creating something new, working with clients, co-creating with their partners. And therefore, the spaces and the way that we curate those experiences needs to be equally agile to the needs and changing needs of the employees, both during the day, but also during the days of the week. Historically, we procure space as efficiently on a long-term basis as possible, because over the term of a 5-year cycle, when I first, it shows my age, when I first started doing real estate strategies, we'd be writing 5-year portfolio plans. I mean, those are completely irrelevant today. In fact, we're probably writing monthly forecasting plans around take up and demand. And therefore, the procurement of services and buildings and leases has to respond to that agility and dynamic nature of the demand of the employer and the enterprise. So flexibility is something in everything that we do, both in terms of the way we deliver the service, but also the way we buy it. And increasingly, to drive agility in real estate, you have to join the dots together more than ever before. We can no longer operate in our swim lanes of facilities, projects, transactions, finance, IT. We need to do this as one, using a common data insight platform in order to learn from the activities around us to shape and adapt services, service levels, respond to alarms, whatever it might be much more predictive and prescriptive in the way that we service our clients' requirements and operate our buildings. And that moves us ultimately to this future state, which is not that far away, when I think we'll be working where space becomes a service in the same way that software is a service, and on demand from the employee as they go for what they want it for that day, triggered and probably acquired and transacted through smart devices, and using data and sensor information to continuously adapt the understanding of the demands of the consumer. And this is moving towards real estate as a consumer product rather than an asset. So those are the 5 themes that really are top of mind of the businesses that we advise. And I think return to office has probably been the thing that's been talked about the most, but really it's a bigger question than, how do we drive return to the office? But why do we need people to return to the office? And should we be pushing for a return to the office? Now, there's a great story of asking directions, and the response to the person you ask is, well, I wouldn't start from here. And depending on your organization, your problem statement will be really depending on where you're starting. If you're starting as a startup, you have the privilege of choosing how you operate your business, and many organizations which choose never to own or lease they to work. But I think if we changed settings. Can you hear me okay, Connor? Just checking.
Sorry, yeah, yes, Mike, you're breaking down small, but
Connor, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. And from a sort of, I think increasing
Sorry, Mike, we've lost you there again. No, Mike?
what we're calling a flight to quality. And increasingly, we're seeing demands from employees for much more personalized experiences. So my challenge to everyone is to no longer think about returning to the old way of working, but actually to think about a future state. How do we imagine the art of the possible? How can we transform and change that future state? And what is the portfolio need and ultimately the servicing of that space that we need in order to make a high impact for our enterprises and our organizations? The good news is I'm not here to talk about the end of the office. Not far from it. I'm saying that the purpose of the office, its function, its form, its experience needs to adapt to a new order, because ultimately we're human beings and we still enjoy being present and with each other. It's just that the outcome and the output and the product needs to adapt to this new world. Now, the starting point is at a city level. What does that future city need to provide in order to attract businesses and to meet the needs of employees? And we talk about vibrancy and a flight to vibrancy now more than a flight to quality. And future cities need to be 24-hour cities with live, work, and play, with culture, with amenities, with great transport, with sustainable foundations, which look after both the health and well-being of the residents of that city, but also provide choice and flexibility for mobility and for living and ultimately for working, which might put a bit of a challenge for any organization that is putting its real estate into out-of-town remote business park locations, which for the next generation may not be enough to attract them to want to work there. The second side of vibrancy we're exploring is around the future of vibrancy in terms of occupancy. And actually, we're looking at the data to understand what is that perfect position of occupancy, and it's not too full, because too full is frustrating for the end user who turns up on their few days they do get mandated to come in and can't find a seat, can't find a meeting room, can't find the people they intended to meet when they were there, and end up turning around and going home again. And it can't be too empty, because if you turn up and there's no one there, you think, why did I make the effort to commute in? What was the point? There's no energy, there's no atmosphere, there's no vibrancy. So the Goldilocks zone we're talking about is not too big, not too small, but just right. And the data is pointing towards 2/3 full is a key objective in order to maximize the vibrancy of a place, maximize the experience of the employee and the user of that space, and to drive productivity and effectiveness. And I'm going to come back to the word effectiveness because it's key to the success of the future of real estate. So as we stand today, and apologies if I focus too much on offices today, but I could talk about retail and industrial and other asset classes, but the demand for space is variable, dynamic, and in a post-hybrid world, show-up rates, whether it's mandated by policy or just through the choice of the employees and encouragement to come back in, is quite fluid. And when people do come in, we're also expecting and seeing from the data we're tracking that the actual utilization of spaces is quite fluid in terms of where and how people are working and what they need in order to fulfill the purpose of their day. And therefore, clearly the metrics that we used to measure, which were largely around efficiency and cost per seat, cost per person, cost per square foot, and utilization rates per seat, are no longer relevant if people aren't coming in to sit at an individual seat and it's not one seat per person. So we're looking at ways of driving measured outcomes for real estate, which are much more about effectiveness than efficiency. Is the space that you're curating, servicing, operating effectively meeting the needs of the business, whether that's enabling collaboration, looking after the engagement of employees, their health, their well-being, their engagement with your brand, their effective collaboration when they're in that space. That is perhaps a better measure than have we got an efficient building, because it could be very efficient and empty, which is not very effective, or it could be very efficient and full and nobody likes being there and they get out of there as soon as they can. Not very effective either. So effectiveness is the new metric. So if the physical footprint changes to quality and the human experience becomes much more about a personalized consumer experience where effectiveness is your key measure, then what about digital? The digitization of work has been happening for decades, and I've been presenting on smart buildings since early 2000s to some degree, and it's people still refer to the Edge as this smart building that was built in 2015 in Amsterdam. But IoT sensors, the availability of data, our ability to capture, sequence, and diagnose information through multiple sources is changing rapidly, and so fast, in fact, that for many organizations, the issue is not whether I can capture data or not, because we're perhaps drowning information. The question is, how do I use data more impactfully to help me improve the outcomes of my services? What are the causation impacts of information I'm gathering, and how can I use that to create insights into delivering better impact for my business? And what are the correlations between information I'm getting from multiple places, multiple functions, multiple buildings? And how can I aggregate that to deliver better insight for better outcomes, whether that's efficiency, effectiveness, or health, or sustainability, whatever your challenge might be. And there are many organizations with different goals that can now start to use technology and digital outcomes. But the underlying factor of all of this in terms of digitization of real estate is now we have the ability not only to capture and describe what happened from the data we can capture from devices and buildings and services, but we could also start to diagnose why it's happened and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's above expectation, below expectation, better than market, better than benchmark, whatever the metric is. But increasingly, we can start to predict what's going to happen next and why it's going to happen next, so that you can adapt and increasingly automate the adaptation of your response using smarter operations and smarter services, whether that's deploying human resources more efficiently or automating your building response through your BMS or whatever it might be to the data to meet the needs of your targeted outcomes, whatever they may be. So I couldn't do a presentation around digitization and emerging technologies without talking about AI, because it really is dominating so many of the headlines, both within real estate and outside. The question I get asked the most is AI going to take away the jobs that we've got? And the answer is pretty well presented here, which is probably not. It's likely that someone using AI effectively will take your job. And therefore, the call to arms within CBRE and to my clients is you've got to get on the bus and understand how you could start to explore emerging technologies to enhance your ability to deliver your function. And I talk about not artificial intelligence as AI, but I talk about augmented intelligence, how technology and data can augment the capabilities of the user to deliver better outcomes. Now, Gen AI has really caught the imagination of the public and businesses, and the different forecasts you can see here, forecasts of growth to a $1.3 trillion industry by 2030. And many different roles could be impacted just by Gen AI, but in AI, as we talk about it, has been around since the 1950s, and we've been looking at ways to automate and use machine learning to actually automate functional performance for some time. I think the Gen AI piece is different, and it's different because it is suddenly, like smartphones really open the eyes of the employee to devices. So AI is opening up consumers to the potential of technology enabled by this magic of AI. But it does come with consequences and risks. Much of the large language models that are being used to operate AI platforms of today have been written 20 years ago, and therefore are open to unconscious bias and exclusion of certainly not inclusive in some of the algorithms that we're seeing out there. And also there comes a high level of risk in terms of cyber fraud and misinformation. And again, that may not be so relevant to real estate, but it will become relevant to society. And I think that's where we probably need to be quite smart in the way that we deploy the technology. Perhaps slower than this chap on the left, who you may recognize, is Sam Altman, the CEO of ChatGPT, or the parent company OpenAI, who has turned a company launched, let's remember, in November 22 into a business being valued by some as 80 to $90 billion in the matter of 18 months. Extraordinary how he is testing the mettle of the bigger tech, more established players like Google and Meta, Amazon, and others. Now, much of the focus of this has been around text generation, the ability for you to create content, to abstract documents, to translate documents from word to word. I think the big transformation we're going to see in the next couple of years is the ability for text to generate images, like the one I had in my opening slide. And what you're seeing in front of you is text generating video, this is OpenAI launching Sora, which they did the day that Google relaunched its old Bard into Gemini. So this is a bit of an arms race to who can create the most creative outcomes through Gen AI. Now, what has this got to do with real estate, you might be asking? But imagine if you can do building tours or design or workplace concept designs, putting in text, putting in some basic information and getting images back. Imagine if you were doing building onboarding. Imagine if you were looking at scenario modeling of design of workplaces or public realm or spaces where people would move around, and you could create an image just through text. It's quite transformational. So what we're starting to see then is lots of small use cases coming together at scale. And I think that's where AI and real estate becomes quite interesting. And it's the continued development of our ability to create language models that can not only respond to data and text and images, but also can respond to much more integrated and mixed media. So we're starting to see your ability to input data, image, and video into a model, and it can start to translate and diagnose outcomes. And you can think about the medical industry. If you're a GP or a consultant getting X-rays and videos of body images and medical history notes and BMI information, whatever it is, and aggregating to a diagnosis. Imagine what we can do with real estate if we can get videos of movement, data from systems and data from live sentiment into a common model, and do that at scale. And I think that's really the key thing here. And the mainstream access, the ability for us to do this to our device, rather than relying on a data scientist and a massive data center somewhere, is what makes it so compelling. As always, real estate lags behind many industries. And at the bottom, you can see the amount of VC funding into prop tech real estate as it relates to AI. We're some way off the races compared to social media and creative arts, film, TV, financial services. I mean, the evolution of customer service centers with Gen AI driven bots and natural language responses to your questions is going to transform customer services, and that will have a real estate impact for sure. And certainly within FM, we're starting to see how you can use natural language processing for help desk inquiries. So you might be responding not just to a work order system, but you might get a human response to a question, helping you figure out a fix to a problem or to find a service, which improves the user experience. So where we're focusing our efforts is around really the things that really matter, because just because you can do something using technology is not a recommendation that you should. I coach a lot of clients avoiding what I call tech tourism. Do not go for shiny object syndrome because everyone's talking about it. I must have an AI solution to this, that, and the other. And if you are going to focus your efforts, focus on things that are going to have impact. The second thing is, do not rely on small sources of data to shape your whole data strategy. You can only really rely on information if you get a bigger data source, an aggregation of that source at scale. And then the good question is, do we do this ourselves? A lot of my clients have this desire to build things because they're technology companies. Often the answer is don't build, but partner or even buy technologies of those who've already established the proof points and the models. So increasingly then it's about creating programmatic solutions of technology and AI-driven insight through programs that impact the big things that matter, big use cases, having strong governance around risks related to cyber, misinformation, privacy, some of those grand themes which are going to become more and more important, including ethics and diversity inclusion, some of those themes. Partnering with people who can get you there quicker, because you don't want to be doing this for the next 5 years because technology is moving at such a pace, and so is the functionality of it. And then it's really around how do you then embed that into my day-to-day actions to improve either efficiency at one end, so I can do more with less in terms of my investments, my people, my resources, my systems, and how do I scale that up to optimize that and make it more effective in terms of the outputs and the outcomes we're trying to generate here. And there requires then at the back end continuous reskilling of my workforce, my suppliers, my real estate teams, even my end users, to work with new technologies in order for you to get the best from the investments that you're putting to place. So what are the use cases we're starting to explore? At the base level, you can see here the ability through Gen AI for real estate processes to be incredibly transformed through efficiency of data abstraction. For example, translating a lease into a database system, or making some queries about a workflow, or just creating content for anyone in the industry. We have a very process-driven industry in real estate, and therefore having the ability to do that much more efficiently is a baseline. And then if you look at the life cycle, we're exploring a number of use cases where, for example, in transaction activities, if every transaction gets put into a system and you understand the buying and selling preferences of buyers and sellers in the marketplace, you can start to predict who is most likely to be the buying party for a new product that comes to market. So we're looking at predictive analytics on buying behaviors to influence transaction flow. In construction, predicting overrun of program or overrun of budget, using data, using huge volumes of data to understand the complexity of a project, its location, its considerations in terms of its design inputs, to say this is a high risk project, and therefore predicting any early indicators, whether that's likely to lead to a program or budget overrun, is going to be hugely valuable. In the leasing market, understanding the space requirements of a business and then predicting whether an organization will renew its lease or needs to relocate. And last but not least, into that FM space, which relates to both procurement of services, but also the delivery of those services. So our kind of prediction is we're going to be seeing a future state where transaction investments, will be highly predictive using AI, that a lot of the workflows, the back office, will be increasingly automated through technology to improve speed, efficiencies, and margin, I guess, for those delivering those services. And at the end of it, the idea that we create this omnipresent facilities manager, not replaced by machine, but augmented by technology. So take that through one step further, the ability for that facilities manager to use high volumes of market data aggregated at scale to inform building, budgeting, performance, risks, alarms, systems, whatever it might be, and aggregating both real-time information from the built environment, portfolio information to understand how that building is performing relative to the overall client portfolio, and then external market data to understand whether it's performing relative to global benchmarks or regional local benchmarks. Then it's around, well, once I've got this insight, how do I then automate my response? So it's starting to predict the fix, or predict the maintenance, or predict the replacement, whatever the outcome is that you're able to use the insights to inform. So you'll be able to then, at scale, one facilities manager doing so many more activities across more complex sites because of the scale and the automation, the diagnostics that they have at their fingertips. And then it's really around how do we then drive outcomes, whether it's speed, whether it's response to tickets, whether it's reduced cost or improved performance. It really depends on the context. So across from left to right, we're already starting to see some very simple efficiency gains, and our ability to work with higher content and volume of data. But over time, moving from left to right, the ability to then drive creative differentiation through technology and through bigger investments, which may take a little while to get the ROI back, but will certainly drive much bigger outcomes and be worth the investment. Why does this matter? Do we need it at all? Well, if you look at some of the demographics of the FM industry, the average age of engineers, the retirement profile of that workforce, you're going to have to, just servicing the needs of our clients and our portfolios around the world, we're going to need to increase the efficiency and the resourcing outputs of the smaller workforce. And therefore you can see some of these day-to-day tasks and the lines here could very quickly be accelerated into a smarter future where you can do more with less, and you need to start to integrate some of those activities across the IFM scope. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I think where we're starting to get excited is, imagine a future where you're not just looking at smart FM in a silo, in a single ivory tower, but you're looking at the entirety of the real estate life cycle, from strategy to operation and everything in between, from transaction, operations, and asset management. So on the page in front of you, you can see some of the data that we're tracking globally for just pure occupancy using building sensors, IoT devices, badge swipes, whatever it might be, 350 million square feet of data in this database alone. You can start to get quite smart around predicting occupancy at different days of the week in different cities for different sectors. And what we're starting to explore then is a model where we can use predictive analytics around occupancy, mapping that against the forecast demands of the companies that are using the space, to then automate transaction recommendations, city recommendations, where you're looking at consolidating multiple buildings in one site, and then ultimately portfolio recommendations. So real estate 101 delivered at scale using predictive analytics and doing that with increasing automation. But the problem with occupancy forecasting is no longer binary. It used to be that we would say, how many people have you got? How much space have you got? What's your space per person allocation? And are you going to grow this year, next year by how much? And that would give you a pretty accurate forecast. But when you don't know your head count, because even your client business might be impacted by AI and automation of roles, when you don't know how many days of the week people are coming in, and when they do come in, what they use the space for, it becomes a much more complex algorithm that starts to predict space fulfillment and how do you match supply and demand. And that's where AI is helping us look at this with real insight. And the last thing then really then is, how do we use that information to then integrate real estate analytics with FM analytics? So just to explain what you're looking at here, the Monday to Friday cycle of occupancy peaking increasingly on a Thursday afternoon, which is the new Friday. And then you start to see, okay, I can understand the variability of how people are using that space during the day and how much of it is individual working, how much is team working, how much is collaboration, amenities, support services. But then integrate that information with your facilities management operations, and you can start to automate service levels of cleaning, security, catering, lighting, heating, cooling, whatever the service is, on a demand basis with predictive analytics, so that you don't have any waste and underutilization of resource or service. That's a future state where suddenly you can make massive impact on cost and operation efficiency, on sustainability goals, using data and integrating that data between the life cycle and the services of a real estate function. So the strategy then has to be, understand the pain points and the things that really matter. Explore really then what data you need to inform that strategy and how you can build that data at scale and integrate between the silos. After that, really, it's a question of, do you create solutions yourself? Do you build it? Do you buy it from a service provider, or do you partner with a technology provider or a real estate partner for that matter? And then how do you programmatically go from your steady state today to a future desired state? And how do you learn from that? And how do you then measure the right outcomes that proves that the investment's been worthwhile? And that's really where I want to close my presentation today, is that I started talking about the metrics that we use today in FM around efficiency may no longer be as relevant as they were in the past. And it's really going to be about measuring facilities management's effectiveness to meet the needs of the enterprise, whether that's cost, sustainability goals, whether that's employee engagement, collaboration, health, well-being, or all of those things. So we're starting to see organizations really challenge both the measures and the skills that need to be sitting within real estate teams to start to transform the potential outcomes that we can deliver as an industry in the future, where it's no longer real estate working in its own silo and the pillars of that real estate function, but also working across with HR functions, with IT functions to support this digital future, and working with the business to understand the needs of the enterprise, but also with the consumer, i.e. the employees, to understand their needs, so you can start to match all of these services together. Now that looks complicated when I put it up on the screen, but you can imagine just looking at the top line, the future effective workplace measures will include tracking the impact of all service on employee experience, the impact of workplace to meet the organizational needs of the business, to enhance collaboration and efficiency and productivity of the workforce, to do that at the right price point without waste, without overrun of capital, without inefficiencies, and not having empty buildings on a Monday and Friday because you were provisioning for the maximum demand and the rest of the week is underutilized. But also to do it with real purpose, to do it with sustainability at its heart, with social inclusion at its essence, which is what's going to appeal to the workforce of tomorrow. And it's going to be a key selection criteria of many younger employees around who they want to work with or for. And I think those come together to create quite an interesting future state of performance management, which needs to be at the heart of operational service delivery. So we need to be experts with a PhD. We need to recognize that we can no longer rely on being efficient, but we have to become more effective in the way we deliver our services. We need to focus on the things that matter, the problem statements that are the biggest for our clients, in order to then invest data, programs, and technology to deliver better outcomes. And we need to recognize that in order to measure success, we can no longer rely on the metrics that we used in the past and the SLAs we've used forever. If it's not broken, we're going to have to break it. Otherwise, we're going to be focusing on the wrong things. So my advice to everyone on this call is it's not something that we enter the future, but it's something that we need to create in order to win the race. And with that, I'm very happy to open this up to some questions.
Thanks, Mike. Brilliant stuff. Yeah, really insightful. Enjoyed that. We have one question here already. So it says, thanks, Mike. Can you share more about the general volumes of client requests CBRE are seeing with regards to the application of AI within workplaces, please?
Could you repeat that? I'm just
Yeah.
not...
I suppose they're looking for the general volumes of client requests that CBRE are seeing with regards to the application of AI. You know, is there a lot of client demand, I suppose? Is this...
I think it appears on every single one of our meetings. We are getting clients, if nothing else, just interested and understanding what's going on out there. Should I just be aware of it? Should I be acting on it, or should I be progressing it? And the answer to that question is always 100%. You should be learning and be aware of what is happening out there. If you're not, you're really going to be your stakeholders who may likely ask you the same question, right? And if you don't have a response and say, yeah, we've got there's nothing for us today. And then the actual, should you implement anything around it, really boils down to your level of ambition within your organization. Do you want to be seen as a market leader and pioneering new things, which might fail? And that's the essence of innovation. Do you want to be a fast follower, just making sure you're keeping up with your peers, but just making sure they make the mistakes and you don't make them and you can follow fast? Or do you just stay where you are because it's not your organization's culture to invest in these things, and you can be a cynic and say it's all big hype and it will all disappear and we'll be back to doing what we did before? So I think it depends on those factors, really.
Okay. I might have a few more questions, if that's okay, and I'd invite others to either put it into the chat box there, the Q&A, or put your hands up. We'll certainly bring into the conversation. Yeah, look, you mentioned there about how do I use data more impactfully to drive improvements and support the business objectives? Certainly, my own perspective of that is we find a lot of clients, I suppose, aren't fully sure what their key drivers are, and therefore, you had a slide there at the end that had 5 simple bullet points. What's your strategy? How you define the data? What's your FMs or your solution, and how you implement that afterwards? I mean, certainly that's the biggest stumbling block I've seen to date. Are you inclined to agree with that or disagree that not knowing the
Uh,
information you want
yeah,
is the starting point?
yeah, I think often the stumbling block is not knowing what you're trying to fix.
Hmm.
So it doesn't matter what strategy you deploy, if you don't know what the outcomes you're trying to deliver are, you inevitably going to fail to meet some of those expectations, right? So our starting point is define the need and the problem statements you're trying to fix, whether that's I need to reduce my costs, whether that's I need to improve my occupancy, or I need to meet my sustainability objectives, or I need to be more efficient because we just got to evolve our work practices. Then you can look at, well, what data do I need to capture in order to inform the solution that is going to help me improve that outcome? And what are the sources of that data? And do I have the information at my fingertips? If not, it's either start capturing the information more efficiently from the data sources you've already got and aggregating them into a central place, or it may be adding some sensors or equipment to allow you to measure things more effectively. It amazes me today that so many organizations, despite the pandemic and despite occupancy being one of the top topics, still rely on, and these are global organizations, I'm not talking about small companies, still rely on badge swipe data, where they're only capturing badge swipe in as their primary data point for tracking the future demands of their business for space.
Hmm.
They don't know when people leave during the day. They don't know what they do when they're in the building. They don't know who they meet, where they sit, what they do, where they, what spaces they need. And they're trying to build a strategy around one badge swipe in data point, which is incredible, really, when you think about it. When there's so many different ways of capturing it, whether it's thermal sensors, whether it's IP logins, whatever it is, movement trackers. And many of the better clients we've got are tracking 3 or 4 sources of data to answer different types of questions, which are informed by occupancy, whether that's a sensor on a toilet door to track your cleaning performance, or whether it's a sensor on a desk to understand who uses what seats, what time of day, and how they collaborate as different teams. So I'd say, yeah, data is going to be the key to the long-term performance of workplaces.
Yeah, so the starting point there is trying to, I suppose, assess what kind of information you need and how that supports the business itself. Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier also about kind of, looking less about efficiency and focusing more on effectiveness. I'm just wondering, how is effectiveness measured? Is this something that's soft or is it subjective?
Yeah, well,
How,
that scorecard I gave you at the end, if you aggregate those together in a balanced scorecard, and different organizations will prioritize different pieces of that, right? So whether it's
yeah.
finance, so actually it's the balanced scorecard across all of those things. Some of them will be quantitative measures, which are real-time data points, which are fixed. Some will be qualitative things, which might be the sentiment and feedback from an employee base using that asset, right? And it's the ability to aggregate them together. And it may be that some of the data isn't captured by real estate, but captured by the HR function or by compliance or risk or security or whoever it is. So we're moving towards effectiveness. It becomes an enterprise KPI rather than a real estate one, and it becomes something that aggregates multiple information points in order to inform decision making from the leadership. The hardest thing is causation, right? Is the cause of my employee engagement my great workplace and free food, or is it the fact they're underpaid and they're not engaged with the brand? It's very hard to. I mean, you can put a causation on. We've got a fault in a piece of equipment, and this is what caused it, and I fixed it. That's easier, right? So there's a bit of a leap of faith, but certainly the more sophisticated organizations are looking at more of a balanced scorecard.
Okay, great. And I suppose you talked earlier also about AI and the potential for misinformation. Certainly, I've used some of those tools now and again, not too often. What I find is it's useful for prompters, but there's some information within it I wouldn't necessarily agree with. Now, whether I'm wrong or they're wrong or AI is wrong, up for
Yeah.
debate. But I think it's fair to say that should be kind of taken with caution. Would that be fair to say?
Totally agree with that. And it's interesting because the bigger challenge pre the current excitement about AI around smart buildings was that a lot of the prop tech was developed by technology experts who knew how to capture information and provide you a device, but they had no domain expertise around what the information was saying and what it meant and what was the causes of the sensor to go off or whatever, right? And the same relates to AI. You can have someone write a very great algorithm. The chances are they're not an FM specialist and they don't really know what the algorithm should be looking for or what it should translate as to the purpose of the information when you get it back. So that's why I said augmented intelligence is where the future is. It's using domain expertise around facilities and the cause and effect of different things and enhancing its ability to analyze at scale multiple sources of information to improve control and improve operations.
I, yeah.
And I think that's where we should feel comfortable as experts is that domain knowledge remains core to the role. It just can be using so much more information now to improve its effectiveness.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Historically, there's been a disconnect between those developing the technology and those that are actually going to use it afterwards in terms of, what information do we actually want to collect here.
Yeah.
Derek has a quick comment there. AI has proven very valuable for data collation and interpretation, but how far has Gen AI developed in terms of problem solving for FM teams or strategy development?
Yeah, I'd say it's very early days. All the use cases that I've shared with you are either in a pilot phase or we're testing with clients in a controlled environment, right? Because of the lack of proof of the reliability of information being pulled from automation or the complexity of aggregating the data even with AI. So I'd say it's very early stages. We're just out the gate. I think in other industries where I reference financial services, where customer service call centers and that kind of stuff have been evolving this for a few more years and are ahead of the curve. I think that's where we can get some immediate impact, the ability for you to triage help desk inquiries through AI-driven insights and then apply that intelligence to the deployment of a response. So you could put into a help desk, I spilt coffee, and the AI can instantly triage that to your location because they know who you are, where you sit, and to a cleaner to go and because they know that spilled coffee, it means cleaner, not engineer. So one thing we're doing with a number of our clients is using data to resource plan much more efficiently as to what do we need more technical people or more cleaning people or admin people based on the volume of tickets that we're getting and making sure we've got the right people doing the right solution. So you don't have an engineer turning up to a meeting, which is more of an administrative meeting. You focus the people on the tasks that matter for their skills and their role. So that resource deployment, if you want to call it that, is live now. We're doing that now. The smarter stuff around automation, building controls is still being proven out.
Very good. Yeah, so I mean, certainly, we're starting to see how AI is getting the attention of C-suite. I think something over the last 10, 15 years, which has continually popped up, is how does FM as an industry improve its profile, I suppose, and how it demonstrates the value that it's not a cost, it's a value.
Yeah.
And certainly for me,
Yeah,
it's a fantastic opportunity.
You just made it been saying moving from efficiency to effectiveness, cost to value is efficiency of cost to effectiveness of the value you can bring. And I think if you're forever measuring things in the back office, in the boiler room, in the cleaning space, you will only be managing efficiency and cost, right? It's only when you can elevate your ability to influence employee experience, collaboration, perhaps working in partnership with other functions such as HR, then your value proposition is elevated significantly higher. The problem is if you continue working on the information you have and the metrics you've got, which are about compliance and service levels, are in the very defined, controlled FM space, you'll be off forever in the basement in the back office, is my view. And now's the opportunity because the reality is HR teams aren't on top of this. They're quite transactional in the way they've been managed over the last decade, and smart real estate functions with their FM leaders are filling in the void.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, look, I suppose ultimately improving productivity. I mean, that's what catches C-suite attention. Well,
Yeah.
one last question from me there, before I open up again to the table here. What do you see as the main obstacles for implementing these solutions?
Um, right now, there is an obstacle of understanding and fear of being not wanting to fail and trying something which is unproven. There's an obstacle of capital, with cost being such a focus of everybody. They don't want to put money into things which are yet to be defined in terms of outcomes. So they're focusing on things which they know they can get an ROI on. For many organizations, they just don't have the data sources to actually apply to the models to have confidence that the outcomes are going to be effective. And then I'd say it's ultimately a skills issue, with the industry being very analog and based on skill sets which are not driven by digital. And we need to reskill both our operational teams, but also the end user, in order for them to benefit from the digital services you might deploy.
Okay,
And I think that's a long-term transformation challenge for the industry.
thanks, Mike. Anyone else out there want to put forward a question or put something in the chat box, a statement, an observation, or if you want to raise your hand, maybe we can bring you into the conversation. Not seeing any other questions or no. Sorry, Massimiliano. Yeah, Massey, is something, can you hear us there? Can you talk? Want to unmute maybe?
Put it in the chat. That's it.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Massey, yeah, I'm just clicking the ask to unmute there, maybe, Michelle, can you hear us? Or maybe,
Type it in the Q&A.
yeah, do you want to try put it into the Q&A questions there? Perhaps instead, if you can't get through. Desiree Crump just says, very informative, thank you. Just one other quick question, actually. You mentioned about VC funding. What's VC funding?
So venture capital funding. So a lot
Capital.
of the startup in tech innovation comes from private equity or venture capital, supporting seed ideas into startups and then going through various rounds of financing.
And it's lowest in real estate. Why is it lowest in real estate?
I think they can see higher returns in other industries if you and faster scalable deployment of products, right? So there are some specialist VC funds that specialize in prop tech, but they're small and few and far between. So it's just not seen as a big consumer market. Therefore, often they'll focus on either higher value, such as biotech or financial services, or higher consumer market scalability, such as global consumer products and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Um,
Massimiliano, can you try that again?
there he is. Hey, Massey. No,
No, not
he's
happening.
shy.
Okay.
It's not often you get a shy Irish audience. So I thought there'd be a lot more people chatting.
Um, He's an issue. He had an issue here with his app. So Massey's question is: are there companies who have used Gen AI and succeeded uh, in creating PA working place? Sorry, Massey, what's a PA working place?
I'm not sure what the PA relates to. Creating. Make explain what PA is, but we're starting to see, as I said, early pilots around Gen AI in help desks and customer service centers. We're using it for analyzing workplace experience. you're able to scrape data from things like Slack and team sites relating to keyword searches around property or workplace, office, meeting room, cleaning. And that allows you to gather data around sentiment. So we're using AI and Gen AI to scrape data for sentiment and then create reports for insights into different key themes and words. And that including help desk information and data like that. And you can anonymize it in case anyone jumps on it to say it's all about privacy.
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what PA.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't.
Proper functional premises. Yes, sorry. Typo. Yes. Starting to, but very early days would be my answer.
Okay. Mike, I'm not sure. Are you familiar with ISO 41016? It's ISO.
Is that about privacy and GDPR or something?
No, it's ISO 41000 series is around facility management standards, and only recently, I think in only the last 3 or 4 weeks, that technology and facility management standard has just been published.
Okay.
But what I particularly like about it is that it provides a kind of a framework of all the different types of digital solutions. It talks about grids and networks, transaction security and storage,
Okay.
automation, monitoring and delivery, digital workplace, computer and data insight, and information models and framework. And when you see all of those technologies, you realize, you think you might have it covered, and all of a sudden you realize what you don't have. No, not every client and needs to have all of those obviously solutions. And we actually had a session here last January with Infosite, who have an AI tool that looks at all the capabilities of all companies' software tools and looks to see how it meets the specific needs of FM.
Yeah.
And actually, proposes a best solution, I suppose, for additional softwares that can fill those gaps also. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have that framework, right? That you can use as a basis for analyzing compliance to it.
Yeah.
Data you need to prove. I mean, things like sustainability reporting has been a massive headache, which will be enhanced by Gen AI's ability to kind of bring different sources of information together. And I think we'll start to see that deployed quite quickly. John had a question around quantifying the effectiveness of putting into the reliable metric. Yeah, the metrics is I guess it's a problem and an opportunity. I think the problem with effectiveness measures have been that they require diverse data sets and aggregation of those into some kind of balance scorecard, and AI and machine learning allows us to capture much more complexity and simplify it, and Gen AI will allow us to do easier synthesis of that information for answers and solutions. So I'm hoping that it will be an enabler to capture those effectiveness metrics over time.
Yeah, okay. Look, if there's no more questions, I think we're just hitting the hour mark here. I do like your final slide that basically suggested that if you don't decide how you want to get into the future, it'll be decided for you,
Yeah.
effectively. So it's an opportunity here for FMs to create their own future effectively.
It's a call to arms, and it's one that you've got a unique opportunity, and now's the time to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, on that note, Mike, thank you so much. Really insightful. You got a lot of value out of that. Certainly has a food for thought going into the future. And as I say, look, creating that awareness and the first step. And look, thank you. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So also to everybody else for attending, and looking forward to seeing you all at the next event. Talk to you then. Cheers. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Mike.